So, we've talked about disruption, we've talked about data, we've talked about sustainability, and we've talked about cybersecurity. We're now going to expand the vision of supply chain and talk from ecosystems to triple disruption. According to our next speaker, there is a transition from a more predictable arrangement in global value chains, and that is transitions into triple disrupted world view of ecosystems. So let's hear more about this. Joining us to talk about this, I say a warm welcome up on stage to Mads Thimmer, who is CEO of Innovation Labs.
Thanks, Sabine, for having us. We've talked all through the day about ecosystems, so I thought it would be great to get some concrete examples, what we actually mean when we say ecosystems in the new format. I come from Innovation Lab. We're about 30 people spread across the globe, working from 8 different locations. We like to base ourselves on an understanding of what's going on, getting our hands dirty, testing out to see what works, and then staying with what works, making it stick. Outside of standing here or trying to direct an organism of 30 individuals spread across the globe, I work as a guest lecturer at the Stanford Corporate Entrepreneurship Program, together with a colleague of mine, and have helped in the process of making this little book, which could very well be a good stop for you, how to make and lead a business the world needs, because it can be as simple as that. It can boil down to legacy. What kind of world are you leaving behind for your kids? If you're happy about what you do to gain such a legacy, then even your short-term decisions are probably the right ones. But I have a little more time than just this, so let me just explain some more about my understanding of new ecosystems. This is a very familiar quote, especially in the war of Ukraine. It's been brought to our attention that amateurs talk strategy and professionals talk logistics. So logistics seem to be the key word we need to get out of every pickle. Also, it seems that strategy is no longer something that we can put to use. Strategy seems like railway tracks in a race. It'll put us in a specific path, but it will make sure we don't have the kind of agility we actually need to maneuver. So what do we need instead of strategy? Well, we need the flexibility to maneuver. We need the plasticity, the liquidity of ecosystems. The best figure I could imagine would be a cloud of starlings that seem to orient themselves only looking at the birds immediately around them and the target ahead of them. So that's, I think, more how we'll see our organizations work in the future. That's how we're seeing ecosystems of technology working together and even business models supporting it. Mata showed us this image, and this is the core of my understanding of ecosystems as we move forward. That we move away from, you could say, a caricature of the Russian army, the centralized image, through the decentralized period, which is probably where we are right now, and in realizing, bringing about sophisticated technologies in anything that we do, the distributed format. It's the distributed format that are driving the ecosystems, and the ecosystems are based on equal measure technology, business models, and organizational formats. It could also designate very well the image of how blockchain works, how the internet works, but also how your future organizational format as an ecosystem, as an organism, rather than an organization, will actually look like. So we move through these 3, you could say, disruptions, challenges, if you wish. Everyone seems to be disrupted heavily enough, so we're not talking about disruption as much as we used to. But we're moving from the extractive to the regenerative economy, and I'm going to show you some examples of what that means. We're also moving away from a fixed supply chain. Remember the image of railway tracks in a race? That's what we're doing away with. We are cutting the bonds and releasing ourselves in these clouds of starlings where we are free to maneuver. And it also seems that we are moving away from being preoccupied with how in our supply chain management to even include the why in what we do. So we become more strategically centric to our organizations than we've ever been before in supply chain management. You could say we actually become part of the unique selling points, part of the DNA. If you look at it technologically, the war in Ukraine poses as a brilliant example of how the Russian army is centralized and how the Ukrainian army is distributed. And that's how they're able to take on such a major force. It also shows us how infrastructure can be like a cloud of starlings, like the Starlink infrastructure that provided internet connectivity to the Ukrainian teams that could work autonomously but maintain communication. So there was still a backbone of infrastructure. You could not take out the distributed infrastructure that even relied on satellite technology. Otherwise, we see a lot of disruptions in terms of infrastructure. I've visited the Lilium company in Munich, which is VTOLs, vertical takeoff and landings. Imagine parking lots being converted, and they are buying up land, 100 tracts of land in the UK, 100 tracts of land in Spain, transforming geographies when they are launching the vertical takeoff and landing aircrafts. They are electrified, they can fly at 300 miles per hour, and they can basically cover all of Denmark in 45 minutes. And it will be no more costly than the price of a train ticket. It combines freight and personnel. So that's about to disrupt physical infrastructure. Another way to disrupt physical infrastructure is the micro-mobility of goods, which is what we see in drone delivery. Here it's Irish Manor. They can deliver your pizza in 8 minutes from when it's finished, and it has a compostable string that it uses to lower from 80 meters to the ground. So what you just need to do is, once you've ordered your pizza, you need to dash out and get your pizza before your dog gets your pizza. As an example of how a physical infrastructure also becomes distributed. And if you're not yet convinced, go to San Francisco and see how shopping trolleys are being converted into e-commerce platforms like Robomart or Neuro. You have these microcars driving everywhere, connecting growers outside of San Francisco with consumers inside affluent areas in San Francisco, where they can pick up their produce from the self-moving autonomous vehicle. And it measures what it is that they are consuming, what they're buying. It's automatically deducted, and it sort of trickles on to the next who's in need of a freshly picked broccoli, if you ever come across such a need. Supply chain management, it seems, for companies like these and others that I'm going to show you, becomes so centric that it becomes part of the DNA. So goodbye to an existence in the shadows and hello to an existence as the pivotal point on which the future of your organizations actually rests. And we talk about sustainability, and we all know that it's probably something we should be extremely careful about, and it's more and more so an overriding parameter in everything that we do. But it's also something that is now in line with all kinds of sane financial prioritization. And this is because of this figure. 81% of consumers during the lockdown have said that it has changed their buying parameters towards lessening the environmental impact. It'll be interesting to see how the energy crisis will affect our buying choices. If nothing else, we're definitely shopping for much more greener energy, if nothing else. That's also the case for Philips. This is not an unknown case. The supply of electricity through lights to the Schiphol airport in Amsterdam. But what's really interesting in this case of realization of circular economy is that they could have provided light bulbs, Philips, like they used to. But in asking for light, Philips needed to introduce a whole new business model. And it needed to introduce a two-way supply chain. So it could take back existing, used out, discarded light bulbs as part of optimizing their cost structure. They also had to make sure that greener energies were deployed because they were looking at energy expenditure over a longer period of time. So by making the billing and making the proposition more immaterial, Schiphol asked for light. They didn't ask for light bulbs, they asked for light. In doing so, they also prompted the transformation with Philips to move in a completely new direction with their supply chain. And I think that's very interesting, the fact that the way you address your demand can actually have a significant impact on the entire transformation of the supply chain. Lots of interesting tools out there. Modex is one of a lot of companies that allow you to address the CO2 emissions in your entire supply chain, the one that you are part of, so you can become more of an ecosystemic warrior. It's based on blockchain, and it basically is here to let you and your clients know the complete footprint of your supply chain. I visited the Fraunhofer team behind some of the technology going into Fairphone, which is the same thing. They managed to put a dent in the smartphones market, or taking a small bite out of an absolutely Apple and Android dominated market by creating phones that had a clear and transparent value chain. So that was supply chain management that actually became crucial to their competitiveness. Lovia from Finland and partly Italy is doing the same thing. Transparency is the DNA. So you could say that they are manning a supply chain, and the supply chain becomes the purpose of the company, a reinvention of the supply chain. Here, you can make sure you could go back and track every individual product that they design and sell, and see for yourself as consumers that it's responsibly made from the materials and the processes that are involved. Spoor was the last Danish tannery. They were about to go out of business. So what do they do in order to still have a foothold, still be relevant? They reinvented their value chain to be sustainable and transparent, moving transparency alongside sustainability with the ability to track in your shoes. You can track down to the very cow and the life that it had led before it became part of the supply chain that led to your shoes. Consumers want this. Consumers are increasingly putting their buying power with companies that can provide this kind of transparency in their supply chains. And that makes it an interesting case in your ecosystem, because your role changes. Maybe you're no longer just a supply chain manager. Maybe you're even a strategic core manager, because you are actually upholding the very purpose of your company in an age of sustainability. Also, you are the one, as we move from a supply-centric economy where we produce in linear fashion to a more demand-based economy where we are circular. We are basing our production on what is needed in the market. We are needs-based. In this economy, you should maybe not even call yourself a supply chain manager. You should call yourself a demand chain manager, or even do away with the chain, because that's linear, and demand ecosystems manager. Maybe you can find a catchy abbreviation for demand ecosystems manager, and that can be your future title. That's the gravity that we're faced with. We need to put our production right where the markets are. Peter had an example. This is another example. This is Unilever's nanofactories that are based as a 40-foot container that can be put right where the demand is, out there in the market, and it can transition from selling sunscreen to selling beer, depending on what's in demand. It's completely flexible in terms of its produce, as long as it sort of abides by certain overriding parameters of raw material. But the idea is that you are flexible in where you produce things, so you reduce transportation time and you reduce the reaction time you have in your deciphering of market needs. Another company that's championed this and even moved it integral into its organization is German white goods producers Haier. It's the largest producer of white goods in the world, but they transitioned into their entire organization through 8 years into an ecosystem of teams. So right now, deciding power or decision-making power is distributed. It's increased but distributed. So it's a flat, organic cloud of starlings, of teams that are making all the decisions relevant for the company to exist. That's why, paired with other technologies, that they were able to continue productivity at only a 1% productivity loss throughout the lockdown. That's because they had reinvented the way they go about their own organization and even reinvented the way they addressed the market and integrated with the market, becoming demand-based. So basically, they listen to what their clients are in need of, and here they found, by building a two-way carriageway in their supply chain, carrying modular white goods back to repair facilities, they found that users of their washing machines in rural China used their washing machine products to wash their sweet potatoes, and that's what caused the accidents. So they changed the machinery immediately to cater this fact in, so you can now wash your sweet potatoes using white goods from Haier. Now you know, in case you have a dirty sweet potato you need to wash. So this is the image that I think that very much should stick with us, not just in terms of the way that our supply chains are organized in ecosystems in the distributed format, but the way in which our entire organizations will work as organisms, distributed teams working in autonomy and integrating decision-making powers in what they do. You could call it a workplace organism, and here skills and human diversity is what actually applies the biodiversity. You could also see that it's an alignment around the purpose of the company that sort of stays the course, keeps everyone on course. Culture takes preference over structure in how you organize your company and your environment. Your yield is based on effect, and you design for legacy, and that sort of directs even your short-term decisions. You have huge rotation in skills and tasks, like a cloud of starlings, so you don't monotonize work. You don't extract human resources as well. You regenerate even human resources. And you look at building the perfect work climate, because you know that the regenerative working climate and a regenerative take on humans make resourceful humans, which is what we should be looking at rather than human resource. And in this way, you as supply chain managers, you hold the key to both going circular and securing ecosystems, of unlocking user and partner needs in the way in which your supply chain will be better and better at bringing in data from markets and deciphering demands. And by this, you could be bypassing the usual B2B rigidity of supply chains, where you only look one step ahead in the supply chain, and overcome the rigor mortis that we all feel in some way or another in our existing supply chains. And also, I think, to end my contribution, that the very moment that we're in, where people are laying down their lives to work in a more distributed format and fight in a more distributed format, the very least thing that we can do is this, looking at the opposite of war, not being just peace, but being creation. So we have an obligation to create, to think anew and act. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mads. Once again, such a in-depth and eloquent presentation, and really fusing sort of technology and also that aspect of nature. And I loved when you said resources for humans as opposed to human resources, and sort of viewing the supply chain and company as an organism, very much tied into what we talked about earlier this morning. I also wanted to tie into, because we had a poll that I find is quite relevant to your talk. So maybe we can just show that poll. And it was, I asked you audiences, which barriers do you have in your company regarding working with your ecosystems to facilitate innovation? And there were 4 different alternatives. We do not have proper innovation processes in place. We're not used to working with the ecosystem.
Yes.
Innovation should only take place inside our company or other. And I'd love to have your sort of take on this. So we have one that has 0, which is innovation should only take place inside our company, which is probably a good point of view. But otherwise, we're not used to working within the ecosystem, and other is dominant. And then 20%, we do not have proper innovation. What's your, I mean, looking at this?
Well, it definitely tells me a story of the existing innovation processes are not working.
No.
They're in place, but they're not working because it's something else that we're looking at. It's something more than just new product ideas.
Yeah.
We need to reinvent ourselves, and that's a completely different game.
Yeah.
We need to reinvent our processes, not just our products. Everyone has more product ideas than they can bring to market anyway. So who needs an innovation facility that focuses on this? But where's the innovation facility that focuses on transformation, that focuses on envisioning a new role and playing that role out in an ecosystem that you have mapped? I would bet that not many companies actually even have mapped the relevant ecosystem for them, or ecosystems for them, let alone been specific about describing the role that they should take on.
Yeah.
But that's even more crucial than having a strategy, in my opinion.
Very interesting. And just to make it a bit more practical, so sort of tying in that answer and just practically, what can the viewers, leaders, CEOs and management and so forth within supply chain, what can they do on a practical level then to sort of create this ecosystem that is sort of tangible?
They need to start what will eventually, hopefully, become a revolution. But revolutions only happen in hindsight. The October Revolution didn't last a month. It actually lasted 10 years. So look at small steps, small incremental steps that you can bring about, small changes that will create a rhythm. And then looking back over time, you've actually created and facilitated real transformation. But get the small steps in place. It's okay to envision a grand goal for yourself, but don't put it into a very rigid planning framework. Look at the 30-year perspective and look at the 6-month perspective. What can you do in very short time, concrete action that points towards that? And measure it and make sure you measure the micro progress and tell everyone how much you've actually progressed. And then eventually it will solve itself. The rhythm that you're actually establishing will take you to the goal that you've envisioned.
Very interesting. And
it's very easy.
It is very easy. It is like evolution of life. We start as babies, baby steps, and then we grow into human beings. It's just it's a new way of thinking when you put it into sort of the world of business. But did we have any questions from the audience?
Well, actually, we have one, but it's basically the same one that was just asked. It was just rephrased. What are typical characteristics of companies that are successful in their innovation? What do we need to have in place to maximize innovation?
Good question.
And I think, just as a final comment to that, don't look at innovation as outside your usual procedures. I'm very skeptical about having separate facilities, innovation labs, even though I have a company called an innovation lab. But it needs to be integral to your work. Otherwise, it becomes a reserve. Well, if you want to have some good ideas, you can trickle into that environment and keep your ideas then, and then go back into grey normalcy and be conventional again. We need to have a tradition of reinvention, even in our daily practices.
Which is interesting, bearing in mind that 0% who thinks that innovation should only take place inside our company. It sort of ties in a bit to that, but it needs to be on a regenerative, reinvented way.
We need to get out more, and we need to get the out more into our organizations or organisms as they should be.
Mads, thank you so much to the viewers. Thank you, John. And thank you, Mads, really for a great presentation. Hope it was also interesting and worthwhile for our viewers. It's a lot to digest. But the more we hear this kind of narrative and aspects to business aspects, then the more we get acquainted to it.